mentally wrong.
When it comes to design and art, I truly believe that video games are core to my artistic upbringing and deserve a place next to photography, animation, and film. However, much like photography, animation, or film, there's always a way to put naked ladies on full display, then damn it, the pornography industry will venture forth and put boobs and butts on full display. Gaming has become no exception to this, and unfortunately, it has become too lucrative to stop. Sex always sells, but it was always sex appeal, not the actual act of fornication in most games, excluding games that actually are pornographic by design. For every Sydney Sweeney ad, there is indeed a stepsister stuck in a washing machine somewhere. Fan service and sex appeal will always find its way to sell anything from fast food to fast cars, and in our case, video games. That is blatant sex appeal and fan service. In the curious case of Hunie Pop, or a fair sum of visual novels, that is where a fair debate begins, as we leave the realm of purely fan service and sex appeal to lean on something more provocative and X-rated. The games in question is some I had sadly paid real hard-earned money for, and will heavily be censored for my own personal taste, for the channel, and for my personal beliefs regarding pornography. To be fair and in good spirits, all aspects of sex appeal across the fan service and sexual imagery will be censored from this point out, as we'll be discussing and showing actual gameplay from Hunie Pop 1 and 2, and stills from High School Romance and Magi Trials, respectively. Hunie Pop and most visual novels similar to High School Romance are riddled with nudity and suggestive content, so viewer discretion is advised. Before I go further, I must mention that I am a multimedia designer and a Christian. I won't get into which denomination I belong to, but I acknowledge Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and that my belief may influence my perspective. I aim to be fair and thoughtful, but recognize I may not be completely impartial. These are my personal views and don't necessarily reflect the beliefs of other Christians or people who share my faith. When we discuss art and design, one must understand the difference between the two. Art expresses an abstract emotion of the creator to be shared with others. Design, on the other hand, is a creator trying to elicit a specific emotion or action from the viewer. Pornography is neither. The creator isn't expressing themselves in any meaningful way that inspires others, nor is it solving a problem like design is intended to do. It merely aims to provoke arousal. The creator of porn isn't expressing themselves in any meaningful way that may inspire others to do or feel something besides deal with the erotic feelings that they are getting, and it is not design, as design solves a problem by trying to persuade an audience to do and act in a certain way. Porn, yet again, solves no problems besides helping those donate to the local sperm bank. What I am here to debate is not whether or not sex and sexual content should be in video games, but instead where we should draw the line between the content that is fan service versus content that you would see on OnlyFans. May I propose a simple visual to help gauge where the content lies? I call it the fan service to OnlyFans spectrum. Since sex is a natural part of the human condition and a major aspect of human life, I cannot simply dismiss it outright. However, I cannot dismiss the destructive nature of hardcore pornography. As we all know, just because a woman is sexy on screen doesn't mean it is inherently sexual in performance. So what do I mean by fan service versus OnlyFans content? OnlyFans content is the internet-savvy way of saying pornographic. It is a content designed to elicit sexual feelings and attachment to someone or something. The same way that OnlyFans models can interact with their subscribers, video game characters can interact with the player. Fan service is just that, eye candy, but it's not the point. The content can exist with or without that scene involved. In the case of Hunie Pop versus High School Romance, characters in Hunie Pop can send you explicit messages or sext with you. These images are incentives and rewards for successful dates with the 12 female characters you interact with. Some are harmless, some are fan service, or some are pornographic. The goal is to have sex with these women and you are rewarded with their panties as the in-game item and graphic art of them in various states of undress and lewd poses. Meanwhile, in characters in high school romance and a fair lot of other visual novels, simply ask you to make the correct choices that land you in risque still images, oftentimes in lingerie and other times simply in the writing of the scene. Where does what content lie? Let's start with the obvious. When it comes to what is considered to be the explicit OnlyFans side of the spectrum, it would be the pornographic content of Hunie Pop. The sex scene images, the explicit sexting, the in-game items, and yes, the dialogue in some characters like Jessie, Aki, and Kiyu. I would argue the content that is explicitly sexual in the game is meant to bring sexual arousal. Now, not all the content in the game is pornographic. There's a hefty amount of fan service across the game where the outfits are revealing and some of the poses are suggestive, but it could be argued that it was meant to be more of the character expressing themselves in a sexual way that communicates their character. The sext from Nikki is a good example. If you read the message, the image was meant to be sexual in nature, but she lacks the social skills and experience to do so confidently despite trying anyway. It can be argued that this is the writers showing the socially distant and socially jaded character is trying to break out of her comfort zone to be more expressive to those she cares about. In this case, it just so happens to be sexual. Situations like Nikki's sex could be arguable fan service, as you can make the argument of a character arc is being demonstrated to occur by this incident occurring. Now, in her case, yes, it is still sexual in nature, but can also be seen as the character arc as she learns to open up and be comfortable with a person she initially dismissed when trying to be more outgoing. This is what I would argue to be fan service, potentially sexual content that could arouse a viewer that has a narrative purpose. Although sexually explicit, and does have pornographic content with nude and lewd women, it does offer a light story about how difficult and how awkward it is to choose to be open with someone with little to no experience on how. You could also make an argument over Tiffany and Jessica, but I would argue it is more on the lines of lore and backstory instead of exploring the aspects of the human condition, nor anything design related in this context. The same cannot be said of Hunie Pop 2. Although there is commentary about how personal history, personality, and aspects of the person does affect how a person responds to intimate relationships, it does not have anything too deep, narratively speaking, to say about the human condition or a person's experience with being intimate. Sure, things like daddy issues, the current talks about dating trans people, or religious background does have an effect. The goal is almost exactly the same as the first. You need to sleep with as many women as possible, but this time it's to deal with a far larger problem than your own virginity. To be fair, neither game is very deep, but Hunie Pop 1 has one thing the sequel doesn't: a character with an arc. Sure, each character has a personality and personality traits that rounds them out, trying to balance them between dating two girls at the same time. Yes, gameplay is deeper, and the puzzles now have a new element to them that adds significant challenge to the player, but if the reward is just nudes, and not an enriching experience that just happen to have nudes, or can be significantly justifiable in that case, then it is OnlyFans content through and through. Nudity and not safe for work content aside, this is mechanically a vast improvement to the game and adds more room for error and new ways to counter the difficulty. However, to suggest that this game is worthy to be anything more than pornographic feels more vacuous than needed. To suggest that this game has anything is skin deep, and most arguments are fairly hollow. In defense of the game itself, the cast is too big to get anything more than a Cliff Note summary of each girl, since you need at least 2 successful dates with each of the 24 combinations of girls. This is not counting the final date against the main antagonists of the game. The game doesn't go into any depths for each of the characters to properly comment on them, because there simply isn't enough screen time to allow for each of them to shine more than a cameo, a few one-liners, or keeping in their stereotype. Some of these characters are fun and entertaining for the brief time that you spend with them. Others make you glad that they aren't the main focus, or as big a focus as the first game. This quick understanding of each girl sums up the promiscuous life entails. You meet tons of girls, but remember only the 2 that you like, the only ones that you wish to forget, and a few you may want to return to. In the case of high school romance, from the very beginning scenes, our protagonist Shoji is sent to go to a lingerie store with either Leah or Hoshi because Shoji is a guy trying to cross-dress and pass as a girl. But why, you may ask? He was accidentally sent to an all-girls school and doesn't want the hassle of fixing the mistake of their parents who already sent them into this mess. He is then told by his principal, Leah, that he can pass as a girl if he dresses up and acts accordingly. Do we see characters in a state of undress, in lingerie of various functions? Yes, from sports bras to baby dolls and everything in between. But it has narrative purpose, and therefore can be argued to be fan service and not just OnlyFans content. However, erotic content need not be visual alone. For those of you who are familiar with 50 Shades of Grey, it would attest to that. The written word can be just as much of a turn-on as anything else. For instance, a maid scene with Shoji and Leah, and this is where I would argue it would be more pornographic, as it is more explicit, but not as hardcore as Hunie Pop, but still sexually explicit. For simplicity's sake, Shoji is asked to wear a maid costume for Leah, and there is an option to be flirtatious in the situation, and it can be leading to sexual foreplay. Simply put, the scene serves no serious purpose outside to show the direction of the romantic relationship between Shoji and Leah. The scene could be cut or altered significantly, but nothing of significance would be lost. It kind of teeters between the lines of OnlyFans content or fan service, but I'd argue it leans closer to OnlyFans content. Beyond that, it just mainly features women in various states of undress, beyond just Shoji, who is a very feminine in appearance, but a man. Not pornographic, but still eyebrow-raising all the same. I wouldn't want to explain to my family or friends why teenage girls are depicted as undressing themselves with no hesitation, very casually. Magi Trials, unfortunately, is far worse and far more liberal with its more not-safe-for-work content. To even depict magic-induced wardrobe malfunctions in topless women. Now, they aren't showing anything, and it is all heavily implied, but it is still there and leaves not much to the imagination. For Charlie and Sierra, there isn't any reason for the state of undress for their storyline, as their stories has been done in other properties with little issue. For instance, Charlie is a story of learning to accept your new female identity from the state of isolation, and confusion to end up finding meaningful empowerment and growth. No different than, say, Persona 5, when each character in a state of isolation or trapped with some level of confusion, to then meet the Phantom Thieves, to then find meaningful empowerment and growth as a character. And everyone stays fully clothed, with only one minor exemption when the girls don bikinis to advance the plot of Shido's palace, or when on fake stripping to advance Madarame's museum palace. And even then, it is done playfully and has no significant importance on their state of undress, the same way that is seen in Magi Trials. As far as Shira is concerned, her storyline is where you go from being submissive to her and the systems in place, to teaming up with her to challenge the status quo. Now, where have we heard this? A young person joins up with a skilled teacher figure after training in the ways of magic to overcome systemic injustice. Okay, so Sub-Sophia for Luke, and Shira with Ben Kenobi, and the school with the Empire, and now you have the basic idea of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Last I checked, everyone was fully clothed, and the only clothing drops was because Ben died by disappearing act. Eri is the major exception here, as the other characters we were talking about were based on their good endings. Eri doesn't have one. Her story is more harsh commentary on the dangers of indecision and emotional vulnerability. Now, on paper, I like this idea. Hell, I think it would be a great idea for a Silent Hill title where the character's life spirals out of control after leaving their fiancé at the altar or failing to commit. Or the game Catherine from Atlas. It's a good idea, but gets lost in, again, the not safe for work content added across the story. Now, feel free to tell me I am wrong if you feel so strongly, but I find it difficult to focus when I am being bound in chains by a demon wearing a C-string and boots. It's games like this that make it difficult to determine if it's OnlyFans adjacent or just fan service. On the one hand, many anime depict girls in their underwear and trying to cover up, like in many scenes in this game. So it is up to viewer interpretation, and this viewer is pretty confident to lean it closer to OnlyFans side of things, as the visuals are more liberal in its nudity, and airy makes it difficult to make an argument for fan service, as if the game decides you're 100% not invested for either of the main female routes. She comes around and puts you in a more not safe for work situation. Sex and sexual content is here to stay, for better or for worse. Sex still sells and is a part of the human experience for the larger majority of society to various degrees. I am not saying sexual content should not exist nor be distributed. A great deal of films utilize sex and sexual content to drive along the plot. However, there is content that is sexual for sex's sake. What I am simply proposing is better media literacy when it comes to content that can be seen as sexual. We simply need to tell the difference between that is fan service from actual pornography in video games to better protect viewership who doesn't consent to sexual content in their media that may be seen as pornographic. The spectrum is indeed subjective to personal taste and tolerance. However, we all interact with media differently, and we should have the freedom to do so. From my background, some things will be seen more tolerable than others. Some will see things I don't find to have artistic or design merit to be deeply thoughtful. And we must be okay with that because of the subjective nature of art and design. Consider this food for thought for next time you see something a tad risque for your screens.